Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation on strategies for Salesforce success. We're extremely excited to present today along with our partner, Focus. And so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And I do want to cover a few brief housekeeping notes since we have some folks here on the call, and you'll notice that you are muted. You're in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. That just gives us a chance to sort of present all that content. However, I do want you to feel free to submit your questions or any use cases that you may have in the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel. So we'll be monitoring that throughout, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end in case you have anything that you'd like us to review or discuss. Any questions we don't get a chance to address during the call, we'll certainly go ahead and address those via email. And we are recording today's presentation, so we will make sure to send a link to the recording out to everybody who did register. So for today's webinar, we're really thrilled to be presenting with our partner Focus. Our goal today is to help everyone identify strategies for Salesforce success. And that can be whether you're new to the platform, you've already rolled out Salesforce, or you're just surveying CRM as a whole and trying to make those decisions on how not only to implement something of this sort in your organization, but to do this efficiently, effectively, and of course, cost effectively. So our two companies have come together, and we're going to be presenting a little bit of our experience and best practices with how you can manage this sort of large project for your organization. Now, by way of introductions, my name is Jill McConaghie, and I'm the Manager of Marketing and Customer Success here at LinkPoint 360. If you're new to our organization, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. And just as an intro, we are a leading provider of email and Salesforce integration. We've been in the industry over 17 years now. And what we strive to do is consult and help customers identify ways that they can increase end user productivity, engage their teams with their CRM so that you achieve that Salesforce adoption, because we understand what an undertaking and quite frankly an expense implementing something like Salesforce can be. We have a variety of solutions. We support a number of different implementation types. So if that's something that you're interested, of course, you can review more information about our company. And as I said, we're very happy to be presenting today along with our partner Focus. And we have Steven Wright, who's also going to be joining me today, and he's the president and CEO of that company. And Focus is designed to help organizations manage their Salesforce, implement their Salesforce, and get more out of their experience with that. So as we get into today's conversation, I'm going to go ahead now and just let Steven sort of take over. He can talk a little bit more about Focus and kick off today's talking points. Steve, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you everyone for who's attending this current webinar. As Jill had mentioned here, here at Focus today, what we do, as the slide says, is we're a one-stop outsourced integrated Salesforce management solution provider, but ultimately existing to enable and support companies of all sizes climb that Salesforce Value Ladder. It's actually quite interesting. Our path to what we do today, which is the ongoing design, build, implementation, launch, and support of Salesforce is relatively a unique one. The roots of our business historically have been in what we call outsourced sales management. As it sounds, basically we would deploy sales managers to work with organizations to come in and professionalize their sales organization, which would require anything from the defining, the developing, and the rolling out of processes, the defining and rolling out of structure, implementation of tools like a CRM, but again, ultimately running it as an outsourced sales manager. And so today, it's actually quite funny. We are actually a group of sales managers, sales trainers, deploying, supporting, and ongoing, continuing to enrich the use of Salesforce for our organizations. So that's kind of important to kind of understand as we get deeper in today's discussion. Is our focus has really given us an insight into many organizations where they've either purchased Salesforce or they're planning on purchasing Salesforce, and either we were involved or not involved. But the idea here is many organizations that do purchase Salesforce.com ultimately come to a point where they regret the situation only months later. The idea there is they've gone in, they've purchased Salesforce, perhaps Professional Edition or Enterprise Edition. They've brought it on, they've turned it on. They may have someone in IT that has helped them make some customization, and ultimately get to a point where they go, well, I think the tool is ready. It's pretty much tweaked and ready to go. Work its business. And again, only to find out months later, no one's using it. And it's becoming a drag, both psychologically as well as physically in the organization. And to a certain degree, there seems to be a general epidemic of people buying Salesforce and not getting the value out of it. And that's really the purpose today, is to understand a little bit more about why. And with that understanding why, really consolidating into 4 key points that we see, not only doing what we do, but what we constantly promote out there is really rolling out Salesforce in a much more structured and implementation way from that standpoint. And that's the goal of today's discussion, is to go through those 4 points. Let's delve into it. So the very first point here, and it's interesting, is most people believe they generally have an understanding of why they need Salesforce, be it through maybe one of their networking groups. Other members are using a CRM and they're talking about the benefits of being able to centralize all sales data into the tool. And for some, maybe that was good enough. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's get out there and get a CRM, and maybe it is Salesforce.com. But we have to go deeper. We have to go deeper and ask ourselves, why do we care at this stage? Why do we even care to centralize all of our data? What are the underlying pain points? What are the underlying issues? What are the things that we cannot do today that ultimately we need to be doing tomorrow? These are fundamentally what we need to define, not only to help evaluate and determine what CRM is best for you, but if it is Salesforce.com, what is the tool going to do for us from that perspective there? I just launched a new client here in Toronto, where I'm located, and they were using Goldmine, and they were really just using it as a Rolodex, but they said they need a CRM, they need a much more robust CRM. And I said, great, but why? And it kind of took them by surprise. Well, because we want to centralize all our data. We want to make sure and, be able to get everybody log their opportunities and activities in the system. That's what we want. But again, I said, but why? What, you guys are successful today without a CRM. Why bring in a piece of technology and add that into the mix? What is it truly that you can't have today? And as we started to peel away the layers, ultimately visibility. They really had no visibility as to what the team was truly working on. They could see that everybody was busy, but they had no real idea what they were actually doing. And so at minimum, they really wanted to get answers to what opportunities were being worked on, what were some of the activities that were happening or not happening. But they ultimately really wanted to understand, did they ultimately have a pipeline of deals that would ultimately get them to their end goal of a certain revenue target from that standpoint. Moreover, they had marketing. Marketing was busy, constantly saying they were doing everything they can to generate leads. But what were happening to those leads? Were those leads actually being converted and turned into actual opportunities? And then subsequently, were those opportunities being won, followed up, closed lost, et cetera, et cetera? Finally, they wanted to become a smarter organization. They wanted to leverage trend analysis. They wanted to know, as a result of doing X, Y, and Z, for example, what did it do? Which sales reps seem to do great from a formal quote stage to a close one stage, and which sales reps didn't, and what could they leverage off each other rep in order to do that? So we made a laundry list that was probably about 7 points of the pains, the issues that the organization couldn't do today but wanted to do. And that is where we started. And yes, we used that to evaluate the CRM that we wanted, and Salesforce in that situation was the best CRM for them. But now we actually had something to work around. This was not just bringing in a CRM because we wanted to centralize all data and that was it. But there was now a compelling argument that we were crystal clear on as to why we were bringing a CRM. And as a result of that, we now knew how to customize and build a CRM to meet those needs. And so the first point, just to reiterate, is define the why. Be crystal clear as to why you need a CRM, why you're bringing in Salesforce, what is it you want the tool to do for you? Again, why? So that's step number 1. Step number 2, build the tool around that compelling why. Again, if we know we ultimately want to be able to do trend analysis around opportunity and pipeline analysis, then we need to ultimately build a pipeline, situation, label and with record types and be able to create necessary reports and snapshots and all that good stuff. If we truly know what we need to do in the tool, we can then build the tool to capture that. One of the things I forgot to mention with this organization is they wanted to be able to truly know if the right accounts were getting the right amount of energy. And so one of the things that we did is we needed to tier each of the accounts. And so we gave them a very simple tier, A, B, C. That tiering was not based on what they were actually spending with the organization. It's what their potential of spend was. And that was a culture shock, because most organizations go, well, this is a big account because they spent a lot of money with us, whereas this account spent a little bit of money, so I'll just call them a tier C account. But no, the reality is, how many of your accounts have the potential to be a tier A, but are currently only buying at a tier C level? And so again, because they wanted to know who were their tier A, B, C potential level, but they also now wanted to track the amount of love, the attention, the energy we gave them, we needed to set up the tool to not only capture ABCs, but ultimately filter the types of activities, be it a phone call, email, face-to-face discussion, et cetera, we need to filter all that through to truly measure, based on this type of activity, does it have a positive correlation or a negative correlation with the various types of our accounts. Okay, so again, defining the why, being crystal clear on that, making that list, and then building Salesforce, customizing it to meet the output of those goals, those whys, is step number 2. Step number 3 is where we then have to ask ourselves, have I built a tool here that will work alongside our users, or have I built a tool here that is actually going to be a hurdle to our users from that standpoint? Oftentimes, and we all know that Salesforce is available pretty much wherever you have access to the internet, but most people truly still just use Salesforce on their desktop. Even though I have the ability to use it on my phone or my tablet, et cetera, et cetera. The question, however, is, what have we done in the tool to ultimately ensure that where the users currently live today, where their most comfort area of working, have we been able to provide the necessary tools within the tool to meet them there? Most organizations will, in essence, force their users to simply just say, we've got Salesforce here, here's how you access it. I know you're used to living in Outlook, but I would expect you to log into your Salesforce every single day. I would expect you to manage the records in the desktop, and that's how you're going to use the tool. And what that ultimately does is, often I see people are sending emails or people are receiving emails, and they're copying and pasting those emails into Salesforce because they live in one environment, and then they are asked to log those specific activities in another environment, and that's adding a layer of work, and it's ultimately creating an inefficient process from that standpoint. And so I go through a list here. I mean, ultimately, when we look at, looking at the environment here, the idea here is, is there duplication going on? So for example, if a user has to close an opportunity in Salesforce, and that should then trigger the creation of an order, should we be looking at integration with their back-end ERP system? Otherwise, if I'm logging something in Salesforce and then I have to create another log of that in let's say QuickBooks or Navision or Great Plains, for example, again, that is a barrier. And so ultimately, what could I do to help facilitate and automate some of that so there's not enough, there's no need for duplication from that perspective there. The biggest thing, and I think this is where LakePoint really kind of fits within it, is if I'm a user living in my Outlook, or if I'm a user living in my Gmail and I'm sending emails or receiving emails, if I'm booking appointments, for example, or receiving appointments and all that, if I physically then have to then go into Salesforce afterwards and manually log those emails, those notes, I then have to physically create those contacts after being notified of a new contact in an email. If I had to do all of that, that's a lot of work. For some, it's easy because they're used to it, but to be honest, that's a lot of work. And I think the goal here is what tools, what apps, what technologies are out there that can allow me, in this case, live in my Outlook, live in my Gmail, where I can then leverage the information within my Outlook, within my Gmail, and push that to Salesforce, or even vice versa, push from Salesforce to my Outlook. So for most of our clients, in fact, I'd probably say all of them, including myself, we actively use LinkPoint because I want to live in my outlook. I want to continue to receive emails, send emails, et cetera, et cetera. I want to be able to live in that environment where I'm very comfortable, and I want to be able to feed Salesforce or have Salesforce feed my Outlook without having to duplicate my efforts, duplicate my time, and let's be honest, also switch user interface. I'm used to Salesforce, but I'm also used to my Outlook, and I'd rather continue to live in that. So the idea here around this topic is to truly ensure that you've not only built a tool that meets the why, you've customized it to ensure you're getting the why out of the tool, but most importantly, you've built a tool that will live where your users live and will consistently live. There are things, unfortunately, out there that we may not be, but we should always be striving to make the experience as comfortable as we can for all of our users to ensure we get the best usage adoption from that perspective there. Jill, I know with LinkPoint, and just to kind of throw it up there, we've talked about it here, but any specific experiences you have on your side specific to the whole LinkPoint and the integration to Salesforce as it speaks to what we're talking about here?
No, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons why we even designed today's presentation was really around the synergy between our organizations with the structure of this 4-part audit. And I know we're only on step 3, but LinkPoint comes in at a certain stage, and we can offer those solutions to help users continue to work where they're most comfortable, whether it's their desktop, whether they're in their email, or even on a mobile device. But we find a lot of companies who come to us sort of at stage 3 here, and we identify, well, they don't even know which user bases need a solution. So they haven't gone back and defined the why, not just why do they need a CRM, but who their users are and what they expect each of those user groups or profiles to be contributing to the system. And doing that analysis just in sort of a microcosm with the LinkPoint system helps our team identify best practices and solutions we offer to make the email integration that much easier. The same for designing for output. We support so many custom environments, custom deployment setups, different integration options just within Salesforce itself. But when we present that to customers, we find a lot that they either haven't considered how that customization can affect this sort of how your users interact with it piece, or maybe they're thinking they'll come back to it later. And I think the order of operations, Steve, that you're talking about is really essential here, because once they do sort of define not just why, but who those users are, exactly what they need to get out of it and how to design for that, solutions, whether you're talking about LinkPoint or you're talking about, to your point, integrating with your ERP system, understanding what you need them to have at their hands to make it the most easy for them is really critical. And from that point, of course, we can hop in and talk about which of our additions is the best fit. If you have Mac users versus mobile, if you're working with meeting notes versus recording emails, that's just sort of almost like the last piece of it, I think, once you sort of sorted out the higher bits. And I know we've worked with a bunch of clients together, and we've sort of found that, I think, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I look back at this and I go, this is not really rocket science. But time and time again, definitely for those that have deployed Salesforce, deployed a CRM, and when they're struggling, and I push the topic. So why did you even bring this CRM in the first place? There's a lot of dumbfounded faces from that standpoint. And definitely, the worst case scenario is if I now go down to the users and ask them the same question, what does the organization hope to get out of the tool? And more importantly, what are you hoping to get out of the tool? If they themselves are going, I don't know, I've just been asked to use the tool, that is not a healthy recipe for some long-term success. So it really starts, again, just to reiterate what we've been talking about so far, it starts with having crystal clarity around the why. And that will then give you a recipe to build the tool, and it will give you a recipe to understand how that tool needs to operate in the current environment from that standpoint. That why then needs to also get filtered down to the individual users, because they themselves not only need to be clear with themselves as to why for the organization, but then how does that impact them as a user, perhaps a user in a sales role, perhaps a user in a customer service role, maybe a marketing user. They themselves also need to know what's in it for them, and that all filters down through that why discussion there. So with that being said, we have a strong, compelling why. We've built a great looking tool that is giving us the proper output to address those whys. We've adopted the tool to make sure it's environments that our users operate within. but is that it? And the fourth point here basically says, no, that's not it. Oftentimes we see other implementation companies come in and do an okay job, turning on Salesforce, designing it, building and launching it, but they then hand the keys back to the company themselves to then run it. And for some companies, that is not an issue. If you're small enough where you don't need a full-time Salesforce support department, you might be okay. I oftentimes use the property management type of analogy that says, if you have one house, one basement apartment, why go out there and hire a property management company to do that? However, if you have multiple properties, you're going to need to have some sort of dedication to consistently ensuring that your properties are being well looked after. There's going to be a point in that growth where you yourself can't do it, and you need to either delegate it to other individuals in the organization, or for most organizations, they don't have those. Case in point, most people believe that once they have something like Salesforce or other pieces of the technology, I'm just going to give it to John, who heads up my IT. The challenge with giving it to John from an IT perspective, he's going to work wonders being able to administer the tool and be kept up into the latest additions and what the tool can do, but he's really focused on the administration of the tool. In fact, he's probably going to be more reactive in the ongoing support. So someone would come to and say, hey, I need this fixed, or I need this value added, or this new user just started and I need them to be set up in the tool. John from IT will simply be a reactive administrative support. So most people say, well, in that case, to get a little bit more proactive and assign more direct ownership, I'm going to give it to Susie, our sales manager. Okay, and Susie, obviously, you can argue, well, that's great. She's primarily using the tool to maybe oversee sales, and she's working with the direct users, and it makes sense. She can ultimately see the tool and continue to ensure that the strategy that she requires the tool for is there. The problem with that, Susie also has to run a sales team. And with Susie trying to run a sales team, as well as trying to own the ongoing reason for why and the support of Salesforce.com, something's going to give. And so the challenge we often see is, unless you have a dedicated role that's not only going to administer the tool, but strategically own the presence of Salesforce, as well as the behavioral aspects of it. People are human beings, and as human beings, using something, we have to get something in return to give us that underlying motivation to do it. So, giving it to IT or sales managers is traditionally not the best scenario to the ongoing support, proactive support of managing Salesforce. And so for most organizations, they don't have an in-house or can't afford or desire a full-time in-house. It's one of the roles we play, is the ongoing support and training of Salesforce.com. And we act as your outsourced Salesforce department. The key here is, again, as trainers, we are constantly reiterating the why. As trainers, we're constantly refreshing the why. As trainers, we're constantly challenging that why and continue to ensure that that why is being understood at all levels, management, organization-wide, as well as down to the individual users. We build that why into our training. I had a training this morning, and I started with a new user. And I actually started with a dashboard that's in place, and we went on a journey. We basically started to tell a story. Once upon a time, there are opportunities, and this is opportunities that we won, and these are our thoughts. We went through this whole process that reiterated to this user this morning of why CRM is in there. It's making this individual a much more smarter, intelligent person with that real visibility. And so with that, obviously, we're going to realize that out of the gate, certain things that in theory seem great, ultimately in reality may not be working within the tool. So we're also going to still need to constantly challenge the tool, constantly seek feedback from our users, what's working, what's not working, but we're still going to also need someone to administer those changes and tweak and then retrain on any updates from that perspective there. And so the success beyond going live, beyond defining the why, beyond building a great looking tool and making sure that it's adaptable to the user's environment, is to never stop, is to constantly train, what we call train, challenge, adapt, and train, and then recycle, train, challenge, adapt, and then train more, et cetera, et cetera. It's an ongoing journey with any technology. Obviously, out of the gate, a lot more attention, energies up front, but the idea long term is with technology working, it's just becoming a refining moment from that standpoint there. Jill, anything you want to add on that post-support, the post-go-live part of Salesforce and what you see?
I think it's so huge because, again, a lot of the customers that I run into here at LinkPoint, they come in with maybe a little bit of a smaller challenge than maybe what the Focus folks come to you for. And they're saying, oh, we're trying to fix a small problem. And LinkPoint's just a piece of that puzzle. So if they're coming to us to do email integration, sometimes I even come back to them and go, well, what does the bigger picture look like? What is that why? And as we're identifying those solutions, it's one thing, but we come back time and time again, even with our own software, looking at training and support and ongoing monitoring, as you said. Has your why for LinkPoint even changed? Or has LinkPoint in its current form, is it not meeting your needs because your why for Salesforce has changed? And I think it's important for companies to realize that there's a couple different levels of resource, because training, I hear all the time, well, I don't want to have to go back and retrain folks, or things have changed now and I don't have the bandwidth to go back to my teams and explain it again. And I think realizing that there's organizations like Focus that can sort of take that ownership for you, or even some of the other applications you're using like LinkPoint, where we have a team dedicated to taking that pressure off, training people on just that aspect of the tool, being proactive about updates and changes and that stuff, can really make your life a lot easier. The other thing I see as far as the training and support, one thing I don't think a lot of folks consider, is turnover. So you can define your why up front, you can design, you can figure out your users and get to know every single user, but organizations change their dynamic. So as you have people leave, people changing roles, your why may change, or the organization's why may change, but the people who were there designing and living and maintaining and working through this, those people may have changed. So again, it's really important to keep a pulse on these things, because we have a lot of customers who come to us saying, we need something that's going to get things into our Salesforce. We need emails recorded because no one is using the CRM. And we can certainly help with that with our solutions as far as email, but there's usually a bigger picture behind there. And that's one of the things we've really bumped into and why we partner with Focus is, if you're coming to LinkPoint, maybe you're perfectly set up, but maybe there's also other areas that you could really optimize and sort of enhance your experience with Salesforce, or sort of troubleshoot other areas that you didn't even realize weren't rolling back up into your why in the first place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the only other thing I would probably note, and coincidentally for most, I believe they're now on Salesforce Spring Edition. And so the reality is Salesforce is probably one of the pieces of technology that is ever so changing quite often. And so just constantly being abreast of the new functionality, what the tool can do, perhaps still what the tool can't do, still having that resource that will consistently, through challenging the existing setup and then challenging the existing why, coupled with understanding some of the new functionality, perhaps through better automation or more efficiencies, things like that. Again, this can't be a piece of technology that you turn on, you set up, you launch, and then you're done. It's an evolving piece of technology, but more importantly, again, exactly to echo what you mentioned there, the organization that it's sitting within is most likely always an evolving situation as well. So with that being said, why don't we move on to the next slide here, Jill? So I think one of the things that, as people kind of digest what we've talked about here today is if you are currently using Salesforce, if you guys have currently deployed Salesforce and are actively using it today, regardless if it's working or not working, or perhaps you're planning on purchasing or deploying Salesforce quite soon, my recommendation would be to take what you've listened to, what you've learned today, and do a self-audit on the current situation. That self-audit, you might say, as a result of what we're looking at, generally I feel our Salesforce implementation has been great. Awesome. Why of these 4 things that we've learned today do you think it has been given reason to that? Is it because there was a clear definition of the why? Maybe we built the tool correctly around that. Maybe it's because we have a strong ongoing support department that's constantly challenging and tweaking the tool and hand-holding everybody through the process there. The reverse, if you've deployed Salesforce and you feel you're not getting the value out of the tool, ask yourself of what we've learned and discussed today, what is it that we might be able to go back and tweak and redo and potentially restart or do a mass tune-up of the tool to get more value out of the tool. And lastly, like I said, if you're planning on using Salesforce and you feel you've done your work and you're ready to go, challenge yourself. Have we truly outlined the why? Okay, have we truly outlined the why? Have we given some thought as to how we want to build the tool around that? Not only the customizing the tool itself, but the environment to meet the needs. And after we go live, what are we then doing? Do we have a plan of attack as to what we're going to do to constantly support the tool and the users from that standpoint? So that's the challenge a little bit today, is audit your current situation from that standpoint. Jill, anything you want to add there?
I think this is big. I talk to a lot of companies who are perfectly happy with how things are going. And when I've had those conversations, and again, they're coming to LinkPoint 360, and so they have some challenges because they're looking to integrate some email and maybe solve a couple little smaller parts. And when we talk about this and they say, okay, well, you think everything with your Salesforce is great. Can you measure this? Or what are your goals with that? Or do you really have visibility into what this other team is even doing with it? Maybe you've got your sales team firing on all cylinders, but what's your support team doing with cases? Can you even see what's happening there? And it gets a little quiet when people realize that status quo can be really great because you have a lot of other things that you're trying to maintain as a Salesforce admin or as a sales manager. But there's a lot of other areas where you can sort of uncover and realize, oh, I could actually optimize this a whole lot more. And again, Salesforce and even other CRM systems, they're not cheap. So if you're going ahead and you think everything is running great, I think it's really key to come back and go, everything is great. How can we make it even better? And you'll be surprised sometimes what you uncover. We've done this internally here at LinkPoint 360 and come up with entire processes, workflows, batches of triggers we've set up because we've realized we can get even more out of the CRM than we were even considering before.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, in doing a proper audit and doing a proper, what I call a tune-up or a restart, oftentimes it means scaling back to a certain degree. To really scale the system back to, based on really defining the whys, opens people's attention up to realizing that we built a tool that is so robust, so much going on, but in essence, we only wanted these 2 or 3 things out of the gate, and it's still to this day we want these 2 or 3 things. Perhaps 20%, maybe 40% of the tool is in what we're doing with it is no longer needed. So sometimes it's actually a scaling back, get going on that core, and exactly what you're saying, then start growing from there by constantly challenging the why, what's next, why does that make sense, what's next, why does that make sense, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, perfect. So after the audit here, we want to take some questions here, Jill?
Yep, absolutely. I know we've done a lot of talking about our experience with customers, things that we've run into along the way, and certainly we base our best practices out of those interactions. But if anyone does have a question about any of the topics we've talked about today, or maybe you want to share your experience about your deployment and get our thoughts on it, certainly go ahead and enter that into the questions panel on the GoToWebinar. And Steve, I know just to kind of kick things off, I think we both get asked a lot in probably completely different capacities, what management role is when we're talking about implementing Salesforce or even implementing things like LinkPoint Connect that sort of tie into Salesforce. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably one of those questions that I have to address consistently. Either it's coming at me directly, or as a result of what's going on, I'm bringing up the question, almost like a fallacy to a certain degree. I'm bringing up the question directly to management. The reality is, time and time again, a top-down structure is what I've seen to be another ingredient to being success. So, for example, if ownership is clear on the why, and I participated on the why, and it's clear as to see, how the tool is built around that why. However, through the deployment, through the go live and the ongoing deployment of Salesforce, if the management team is not practicing what they've been preaching. It is creating a message below them that basically is saying, well, they're not doing it, why do I need to do it? Or in other words, we had a client that we had come into who generally had a good understanding of why they needed Salesforce, and then, but they were struggling as to why users were still not using the tool. And I says, well, great, well, let's start with you. And I think the last time that manager had logged into the tool was probably 2 months prior. And so it really started there. And as I went down into the group and audited a little bit more and assessed their current situation, I kept hearing things, well, my manager's not even looking at the information, so why do I need to put it in? In fact, every time we need to have a meeting, my manager asks, to prepare for the meeting, and I then have to scramble, and then he takes my information and consolidates it with other people. So again, he's not really using the tool. And so it's a message that is signaled downwards that if management or upper management does not practice what's being preached, users will naturally follow. And that's what we see time and time again. This cannot be let the users get good and then management follow. No, management has to lead, and the users will then follow from that perspective there.
I've absolutely seen that even with our own software here at LinkPoint 360, where I'll get on the phone to do an account review with a customer who has a boatload of licenses of our software, and we're starting to go through it, and I say, well, what value are you seeking with our software? Which of the many features are the most beneficial? And how many times I've heard, well, I don't have it installed, or I don't use it, but my team is supposed to use it. That sort of stops the conversation a little bit in its tracks, because I'm going to have a hard time helping you assess the value of your purchase or your instance of Salesforce, even if you're not directly involved or haven't even sort of stepped into the pool a little bit with it. So in those cases, I always encourage people, we'll give you the license, download the software, try it out, get a feel for it. Because if you're asking people to use something, whether it's Salesforce or something like LinkPoint Connect, and demanding certain workflows and methodologies out of them, and you don't even know what you're asking of them because you've never tried it, it can make a big difference. And it can make a difference, like you said, about getting buy-in from the other users, because if they don't see that you're using it or understand it, or quite frankly, even hear their complaints about certain workflow options or things you're asking them to do in CRM, it's going to have an impact on their usage of the systems and whether or not they want to be compliant. So I've seen a lot of resistant groups because they're like, this was purchased for us, or nobody else puts anything in Salesforce, and the manager's asking me to, but they haven't even looked at the pipelines in 3 months, and you sort of scratch your head. So it does all roll back up into that why, but I think management involvement can be very impactful regardless of the type of tool you're looking at.
Yeah, and at minimum, a manager may not be an active user in this case of Salesforce, but they are probably leveraging the information from the tool, either through reports or through dashboards. Either they're having those dashboards manually run by themselves or being subscribed to them. I had a client, actually the same client I talked about previously, that was constantly asking what's going on, what's going on, what's going on. But if that manager had ultimately simply just checked out his dashboard, he would ultimately see a story. The good news is today that manager, probably once a day, maybe once every other day, I get CC'd on an email where this manager now says to his team, hey guys, as a result of the story being told in the dashboard this morning, I'm really happy to see this, this, and this. Here's a couple of areas that I'd rather better understand. And I will book some time with those individuals accordingly. But again, keep up the good work. Or it might be, hey guys, I'm seeing some real struggles here. Let's organize it. The fact that this manager is now using the data, but then using the data to communicate downwards to his team is reinforcing, the why. And that ultimately we want to make sure is one of the keys to being successful.
Absolutely. And I know we're going to come up on time shortly, but I do want to throw this other question that we have at you and see if any more come through. And that's sort of talking about, you do this audit and you go through the 4 steps and you reflect on everything and you realize things may not be 100% working for me the way that I wish that they were. At what point then do companies or do take a look at this and go, should I consider using outside partners, outside solutions, outside software to fix this problem, or can I do it on my own? Like, once you do that audit, is there sort of a methodology to them figuring out that next step?
Yeah, and I think for me, it really comes down to an understanding of once they do an audit and they've identified the areas for improvement. If those are a list of recommendations, and the next step is to actually implement those recommendations. As I mentioned before, you might be a one-person operation and go, well, I can do this myself. That's not a challenge. Or I might be a massive, multi-billion-dollar company, and we have dedicated Salesforce.com departments and all that. You might be fine, but for most people in the middle, they don't have a dedicated resource that ultimately can act as that outsourced Salesforce, that Salesforce department. And that's kind of really where we fit in. And we often say, at minimum, I'm more than happy to listen, download, and give my thoughts. But ideally, most organizations struggle with implementing recommendations because either knowledge or most likely bandwidth and capacity from that standpoint. And so if you're going to struggle to implement the recommendations, regardless of how you got there, and there are no resources internally that may have the capacity or knowledge to do that, then I think you're left with kind of seeking some outside help from that perspective there. If you're an active Salesforce customer, you have a community to also reach out to for some guidance and some support. If you've signed up for Salesforce Premier Support, you have access to ask them questions. But again, they themselves are more, give me a black and white understanding of what we need to build for you. But if you truly don't know what to build, and that's the gap, that they're probably not going to be able to help you. So my general feedback there is most people are lacking the knowledge, but most importantly, lacking the bandwidth to truly give it a dedicated focus that it needs. And that's where most likely you're going to need to seek some outside third-party support from that perspective there.
And I've seen too where folks sort of, whether they've formally followed our 4-part audit or not, when they get through that why and then they get to the end and realize, you know what, I may need to make some changes here. You'll find if you reach out, even if you get like an upfront consultation with either a larger firm for consulting or even software solutions like what we offer at LinkPoint 360, you may uncover even more whys or more ways to customize. The problem may even be larger than you thought, or not to be so daunting. There may be so many more solutions or ways you can even impact your business in a positive way by seeking outside opinions. So I think just getting that like third party to kind of look at things and go, yep, you know what, you're right, you are off track here or you're on track here, but did you even think of this? That can be very eye-opening.
Correct. And I think, it's, most implementation companies out there are very good from a technological piece, but in doing this audit, you might realize that there are some gaps beyond just the tool and the technology, and that is understanding truly we're lacking a process here. We're lacking, from a sales piece, we're lacking some strong understanding of what real KPIs we should be tracking in our sales organization. And so even there alone, there may be an endless amount of people to go out there for help regarding the customization of support. But, from two perspectives, perhaps it's beyond the tool, beyond its, understanding just as a system and a business operation and process standpoint. That's where the gap is. Where I see again, where most people are going to, they might have a great why, they might have a great team to customize the tool and get that tool up to date, which is great. It still also comes down to what's going to happen afterwards. And that's where most organizations don't have the necessary resources to provide the ongoing support, not only just administratively, but the behavioral coaching training support that an organization needs to continue to ensure that the adoption rate is getting higher and ultimately getting more value, or what we call climbing that so-called Salesforce Value Ladder. So definitely, support might be needed before usage, but I can almost guarantee you most people don't have a plan and don't have resources to support after go live, and continue to be supportive hand-holding and challenging the tool and continue to ensure that it's acting as a robust tool and becoming a valid member of the family of the organization.
And also where we have a little more synergy between our organizations too, when you're conducting those audits and you're getting that outside opinion, it can be helpful when you're evaluating how to solve all of those problems. So we have a pretty strong partnership with Focus just because we realize that as Focus works with organizations to identify solutions and do the ongoing consulting and support, they may uncover where a LinkPoint 360 offering can actually address a pain point. And it sort of works in reverse too, where we're talking with customers and realizing we're fixing your email integration, but you may have a bigger puzzle to piece together here. So I think getting that outside opinion, not just for the consulting and even the ongoing support, but also making sure as your needs change along the way, appropriate solutions for different use cases along the way can be brought up and suggested, and they may be things that you hadn't considered before. So I just like to throw that out there also.
Yep, very good point. Great.
I'm just checking here. It looks like we may have answered all of the questions that came forward, and I'm just going to go ahead and advance this slide. If you're on the call and you're like me, you'll think of more questions or use cases after the call ends. So if that's the case, I did want to throw up on the screen here some additional resources and our contact information. So if you want to reach out at a later date, have other scenarios that you'd like to work through, you're more than welcome to contact. Steve and I are behind the email addresses respectively that are on those screens, so we'd be more than happy to speak with you, share a little bit more about the topics presented today, or answer any questions that you may have about either Focus or LinkPoint 360. And I do want to take a moment, since I had the pleasure of hosting here today, to thank Steven Wright for joining us from Focus. It was a pleasure presenting with you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank everybody else who joined us on the call. We both hope that this presentation and the steps that we presented are really going to help you work on improving your own Salesforce success. And again, whether you are still surveying Salesforce as a possible option, or you're already well on your way and looking to optimize it. So thank you for joining us, and we do hope that you'll join us again in the future.